Freeze right there. Feel that sudden temperature drop. That's the moment right before the room realizes something irreversible just happened. That quiet click in the air. That's comprehension arriving late, shaking, already afraid. You did it too clean, not loud, not messy, not theatrical enough for them to prepare excuses. You moved with ice in your veins and fire in your spine, and now they're choking on a new phrase they don't fully understand yet. Brutal genius. Because that's the part that terrifies them, not the brutality. They understand brutality. They live off it. What they can't process is the cleanliness. You didn't rage. You didn't flinch. You didn't over-explain or celebrate or beg to be understood. You executed something so precise it left no fingerprints, only consequences. And now their eyes have changed. You've seen it, that microscopic shift, the smile that doesn't reach anymore, the pause before they answer you, the way conversations suddenly reroute when you enter the room. That's recognition, not admiration, recognition. They finally realized you're not driven by impulse. You're driven by clarity. And clarity in a chaotic world looks like psychopathy to people who survive on noise. Here's the paradox they can't solve. You're calm because you've already survived hell. You're gentle because you're capable of violence. You're controlled because you once weren't. And you paid for it in blood, sleep, sanity, and silence. They don't know which version of you they're dealing with anymore. The saint who endured, or the psychopath who learned. That's your power. Unpredictability isn't chaos. It's selective revelation. You don't show every card. You don't announce every move. You let them assume you're done, then you correct them with results. They call it brutal genius because they can't say the real thing out loud. You evolved past their moral categories. See, they need villains who scream and heroes who bleed publicly. But you broke the script. You became efficient. You learned when to go silent. You learned when kindness is a weapon. You learned when mercy is more frightening than revenge. And you learned that restraint, real restraint, feels like cruelty to those who live undisciplined lives. That's why they're uncomfortable now. Your presence forces self-audit. Your silence triggers confession. Your stillness feels like surveillance. You're not chasing validation anymore. You're not seeking approval or applause or understanding. You're moving like someone who already knows the outcome. And people can sense that. They sense you've made peace with your shadow, that you don't deny the dark. You trained it. That your smile isn't naive, it's informed. That your patience isn't weakness, it's timing. They don't know whether to trust you or fear you, so they do both. That's when they start whispering words like brutal and cold and dangerous. Not because you harmed anyone unnecessarily, but because you didn't harm yourself anymore to keep them comfortable. You stopped bleeding for free. You stopped explaining yourself to people who only listen for leverage. You stopped shrinking your intelligence to preserve fragile egos. You stopped pretending confusion when you saw everything clearly. And that's when the shift happened. You became the one they study after the fact, the move they replay at night, the decision they can't undo. They thought genius had to look frantic. They thought power had to announce itself. They thought darkness meant chaos. Then you showed them what disciplined darkness looks like. Ice-cold presence, fire-forged intent, no wasted motion, an angel who learned strategy in hell, a demon who mastered restraint, a mind sharp enough to cut clean, and wise enough to know exactly where. They're calling it the brutal genius because it feels like a judgment on them. Because your evolution exposes their stagnation. Because your silence reminds them of every moment they chose comfort over growth. And here's the part they'll never admit. They're relieved it's you. Relieved the power landed in someone who doesn't need to prove it. Relieved the blade is held by someone who understands when not to swing. Relieved the mind capable of destruction chose precision instead. You didn't become heartless. You became accurate. And accuracy is terrifying in a world built on excuses. So let them rename it. Let them whisper. Let them flinch when you walk in. Calm, centered, unreadable. You know what you are. You are what happens when pain finishes its job, when chaos gets organized, when survival matures into strategy. You didn't lose your humanity. You refined it. You didn't become brutal. You became exact. And that's why they can't look at you the same anymore. Because they finally understand. You didn't just win. You ended the game. And here's the part they don't talk about. The moment after realization. The moment when the adrenaline fades and something colder replaces it. That's when fear becomes respect. Because they replay what you did and notice what didn't happen. No collateral damage, no emotional leakage, no messy explanations, no desperate need to be seen as the good guy. You didn't argue your way out. You didn't threaten your way through. You didn't manipulate loudly. You resolved the situation, and resolution is unsettling to people who survive by prolonging chaos. They were used to leverage, to drama, to back and forth battles that let them adjust mid-fight. But you didn't give them a fight. You gave them a conclusion. That's why they're uneasy now, because there was no opening for negotiation, no crack to exploit, no emotional handle to grab. You acted like someone who had already decided who you were and what you were willing to tolerate, and that terrifies them more than aggression ever could. Aggression can be provoked. Emotion can be triggered. But clarity doesn't flinch. They sense it in the way you move now. You don't rush conversations. You don't overreact to disrespect. You don't correct every misunderstanding. You let people misunderstand you long enough to reveal themselves. That's a predator's patience, but refined, evolved, conscious. They keep trying to diagnose you, cold, detached, too calculated. Something's off. What's off is that you're no longer bleeding on cue. They can't tell if you're angry or amused, if you're observing or disengaging, if you're already 10 steps ahead or simply uninterested. And the truth is worse than all of it. You've learned how to operate without emotional dependency. You don't need them to agree. You don't need them to approve. You don't even need them to understand. You understand yourself now. That's why the saint and the psychopath coexist so cleanly inside you. The saint knows why mercy matters. The psychopath knows when mercy is wasted. And the version of you standing here now decides, without guilt, who gets which. They weren't ready for that balance. They expected trauma to break you into fragments. Instead, it sharpened you into a single point. They expected suffering to make you loud. Instead, it taught you restraint. They expected power to intoxicate you. Instead, it sobered you. So when they say brutal genius, what they're really saying is, we can't control the narrative anymore. Because you don't need to dominate the room to own it. You don't need to raise your voice to lower theirs. You don't need to prove danger when people can feel it in your composure. You've become the kind of presence that rearranges behavior without instructions. People think twice around you now. They choose words carefully. They over-explain things you never asked about. That's not coincidence. That's subconscious submission to certainty. You don't posture. You don't bluff. You don't chase reactions. You let reality do the talking. and reality speaks fluently in results. That's why they're conflicted. They want to paint you as ruthless, but they can't deny the fairness. They want to call you heartless, but they've seen your restraint. They want to label you dangerous, but only to those who overstep. You didn't become cruel. You became selective. And selectivity feels like judgment to people who benefited from your former openness. They miss the version of you that explained, the version that tolerated ambiguity, the version that absorbed disrespect to keep the peace. But that version was unsustainable. That version was bleeding quietly so others could stay comfortable. This version is stabilized. You move with the confidence of someone who knows they can survive loss. You speak with the calm of someone who already faced their worst fear and lived. You decide with the precision of someone who learned that hesitation costs more than action. They sense that you're no longer afraid of being misunderstood. And once that fear disappears, manipulation loses its grip. You don't need to be liked. You don't need to be feared. You don't need to be crowned anything. You are simply unavoidable. That's why their energy changed. That's why the room feels colder when you're silent and warmer when you choose to speak. That's why they're watching now, carefully, trying to predict a mind that no longer telegraphs itself. They call it brutal genius because it forces them to confront something uncomfortable. You didn't rise by chance. You rose by integration. You integrated pain instead of suppressing it. You integrated darkness instead of denying it. You integrated intelligence instead of diluting it. And now, you stand as something they can't reduce to a label. Not hero, not villain, not victim, an outcome. And outcomes don't negotiate. They arrive, clean, final, undeniable, and the longer they sit with it, the worse it gets for them. Because time doesn't soften what you did, it sharpens it. At first they thought it was luck. Then they told themselves it was timing. Then they whispered that maybe someone helped you. But eventually they reach the only conclusion left, and it makes their stomach drop. You knew exactly what you were doing. Every pause, every silence, every decision that looked effortless because the war already happened inside you long before it showed on the outside. They don't see the nights you dismantled yourself. They don't see the moments you stood at the edge of becoming something reckless and chose discipline instead. They don't see the restraint it took not to burn everything down when you had every reason to. But they feel the result. They feel it in how you no longer react on instinct, how you let people talk themselves into corners, how you give just enough rope and never pull, because you don't need to. You learn something most people never do. Power doesn't rush. Power waits, and waiting used to hurt you. Waiting used to feel like weakness. Waiting used to feel like letting people get away with things. Until you realized waiting is how patterns reveal themselves. Now you don't confront immediately. You observe. You don't accuse. You confirm. You don't explode. You close doors. That's the part they call brutal. Because brutality, to them, is finality without spectacle. No yelling, no drama, no chaos to hide behind, just consequences delivered with surgical calm. They expected anger. They prepared defenses for rage. They rehearsed arguments for confrontation. What they weren't prepared for was your indifference. Indifference is unbearable to people who feed on reaction. You didn't argue their version of reality. You didn't try to change their minds. You simply stepped out of reach and took control of the board. That's when they started watching you differently. They noticed you don't overcommit anymore. You don't promise what you don't need to. You don't attach your identity to outcomes you can't control. You move like someone who already made peace with loss, and therefore can't be threatened with it. That's a dangerous kind of freedom, because fear is the leash most people never see. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being misunderstood, fear of being alone. You broke that leash quietly, and now they don't know how to pull you back. They sense that you're not trying to dominate them, you're beyond them. They sense that you're not seeking revenge, you're seeking alignment. They sense that you're not reacting, you're choosing. Choice is terrifying when it's backed by capability. You have the intelligence to dismantle situations, the discipline to wait, the emotional control to act without attachment. That combination doesn't create chaos, it creates inevitability. They feel it when plans change around you, when people defer without knowing why, when momentum shifts without explanation. You don't force outcomes, you become the condition that produces them. And that's why their language changed. They don't call you emotional anymore. They don't call you unstable. They don't even call you unpredictable in the way they used to. Now it's quieter words, sharper words, calculated, cold, too clean. Because cleanliness means intent, and intent means accountability. They can't dismiss you as accidental anymore. You survived enough pain to understand yourself. You learned enough darkness to control it. You absorbed enough chaos to recognize patterns instantly. You're not guessing. You're reading people, reading rooms, reading timing. You don't strike when you're angry. You strike when it's correct. That's the evolution they weren't ready for. They wanted you broken or burning. They wanted noise or collapse. Instead, you emerged composed. That's why they're unsettled. Because someone who has nothing left to prove, someone who doesn't need permission, someone who doesn't confuse kindness with compliance, that person can't be steered. You're no longer governed by the need to be understood. You're governed by clarity, and clarity is ruthless, not because it wants to hurt anyone, but because it refuses to lie to itself. So let them call it brutal genius. Let them struggle to name what they feel when they're around you. Let them sense the shift and pretend it's nothing. You know what happened. You crossed the line where pain stops being a wound and becomes a weapon you control, where darkness stops being shameful and becomes informational, where intelligence stops being potential and becomes execution. You didn't lose your soul. You integrated it, and now every move you make carries weight. Not because you demand it, but because you earned it. That's why the room is quieter now. That's why they watch instead of interrupt. That's why they hesitate before testing you again. They finally realized something irreversible. You're not reacting to the world anymore. The world is adjusting to you. And once the world starts adjusting to you, something strange happens inside you too. The noise dies down. The urgency dissolves. That constant need to prove evaporates. Because you already know. You know what you're capable of now. Not hypothetically, not someday, not if conditions are perfect. You've seen yourself under pressure. You've watched yourself choose restraint when destruction was easier. You felt the urge to burn bridges and decided to let them collapse on their own. That's mastery. And mastery doesn't announce itself. It radiates. People feel it before they understand it. That's why conversations stall around you. That's why energy shifts when you go quiet. That's why people suddenly become polite, cautious, careful with their words. They don't know what you'll do. They only know you can. And capability without desperation is deeply unsettling. You used to telegraph pain. You used to leak intention. You used to explain your boundaries like they were requests. Not anymore. Now your boundaries are silent and immovable. You don't threaten consequences. You embody them. And the most disturbing part for them, you didn't harden into bitterness. You didn't lose empathy. You didn't become reckless. You became precise. You still see nuance. You still understand motives. You still recognize pain in others. You just no longer let it excuse behavior. That's the line they can't cross with you anymore. Because you're not confused about who deserves access. You're not torn between compassion and self-respect. You learned the difference the hard way. You learned that being understanding doesn't mean being available. You learned that forgiveness doesn't require proximity. You learned that peace sometimes means walking away without closure. They feel that in you now. They feel that you're not chasing resolution. You already have it. They feel that you're not looking back. You've already integrated the lesson. They feel that you're not afraid to lose them. And that realization hits harder than any threat ever could. You see, most people maintain control by positioning themselves as necessary. They stay relevant by keeping you emotionally invested, uncertain, dependent. But you severed that quietly. You stopped feeding dynamics that drained you. You stopped participating in cycles that required your pain to continue. You stopped volunteering your energy where it wasn't respected. And the silence that followed was deafening. Because silence exposes who needed you more than you needed them. Now when they look at you, they don't see chaos. They see containment. They don't see rage. They see choice. They don't see unpredictability. They see range. You could be kind. You could be distant. You could be surgical. And they don't know which version they're getting, because it depends entirely on how they show up. That's not instability. That's discernment. You didn't become dangerous because you lost control. You became dangerous because you found it. You know when to speak, and when silence cuts deeper. You know when to engage, and when absence teaches the lesson faster. You know when to extend grace, and when to close the door without drama. That knowledge came at a cost. It came from being underestimated, from being misunderstood, from being pushed until something fundamental rewired itself inside you. You didn't snap. You solidified. And now, even when you do nothing, things change. People correct themselves around you. They hesitate before lying. They think twice before testing boundaries they used to ignore. Not because you demand authority, but because your presence suggests accountability. They sense that you're not playing the same game anymore. You're not collecting points. You're not seeking dominance. You're not trying to win arguments. You're building outcomes. And outcomes don't care about opinions. That's why they're unsettled by how calm you are. Calm after chaos feels unnatural to people still addicted to noise. They expect the old signals, the emotional tells, the reactive spikes, the visible struggle. Instead, they get composure. And composure is unreadable. You've reached the stage where you don't need to convince anyone of your depth. You don't need to showcase intelligence. You don't need to flex awareness. You let people underestimate you just long enough to reveal themselves. Then you decide, and that decision is final. Not because it's cruel, but because it's clean. No lingering resentment, no messy attachments, no unfinished business. You close chapters without slamming doors. That's why they keep replaying your move in their minds. They're trying to find the moment they missed. The signal, the warning, the tell. They're trying to understand how it ended before they realized it had begun. And the answer is simple and devastating. You moved when you were ready, not when you were emotional, not when you were provoked, when you were clear. That's what separates brutality from brutality with genius. One destroys indiscriminately, the other removes exactly what's necessary, and nothing more. You didn't lash out. You cut away. And now there's space where chaos used to be, space for focus. Well, well, well. Buddy, you didn't raise your voice. You didn't swing wildly. You didn't beg the universe to take your side. You enforced something older than mercy. That's why everything went quiet. They felt it before they understood it. That pressure in the chest, that tightening behind the eyes, that ancient alarm ringing somewhere deep in their nervous system. Because you didn't come as a hero, you didn't come as a villain, you came as the thing both sides secretly answer to. Divine law doesn't shout. Divine law doesn't explain itself. Divine law executes balance, and the moment you stepped into alignment with it, every demon in the room knew the game was over. See, demons don't fear violence. They thrive on it. They don't fear chaos. They were born in it. What terrifies them is precision. What makes them kneel is clarity. What breaks them is when someone stops reacting and starts deciding. That's what you became. A paradox they can't corrupt. A blade that doesn't swing unless it's already calculated the aftermath. A saint who understands sin so well, it no longer controls you. A psychopath who learned restraint and turned it into a weapon. You didn't cleanse the room with light. You didn't drown it in darkness. You balanced it, and balance is brutal. That's why the loud ones went silent. That's why the manipulators suddenly couldn't read you. That's why the ones who fed on disorder felt exposed, naked, flailing. Because you weren't playing their moral games anymore. You weren't choosing sides. You were closing cases. They wanted you emotional. They wanted you reactive. They wanted you trapped between guilt and rage. But you evolved past the illusion that goodness means weakness and power means cruelty. You learned the truth they never wanted you to see. That light without teeth is decoration. That darkness without control is just noise. And that true authority comes from someone who can hold both and still choose when to strike. So when you enforced that line, when you finally said enough, it wasn't revenge. It wasn't ego. It wasn't even anger. It was alignment. And alignment feels like judgment to those who live crooked. That's why they dropped to their knees, not physically, no worse. Internally, spiritually, strategically, their posture collapsed, their certainty evaporated, their confidence cracked. Because demons don't kneel to strength, they kneel to inevitability. You became inevitable. Every step you took after that moment felt heavier, not because you were tired, but because reality itself started yielding. Conversations shifted, power dynamics rearranged. People who once spoke over you suddenly chose their words carefully, not out of respect, out of instinct. Animals sense storms before they arrive. Demons sense law before it speaks. And you didn't announce it. You didn't brand it. You didn't even smile. You just stood there, unmoved, while everything that thrived on imbalance started choking on its own excess. That's the price of evolution through pain. You didn't awaken by being loved. You didn't sharpen yourself through comfort. You were carved, pressured, betrayed, misread, tested until the naive parts of you burned off. And what remained wasn't innocence, it was discernment. You now see patterns where others see drama. You hear motives behind words. You recognize corruption before it introduces itself. And instead of reacting like you used to, loud, emotional, explosive, you respond with surgical calm. That calm is what terrifies them most. Because calm means you're not fighting for control anymore. Calm means you already have it. So when they whisper that you've changed, understand this: they're right, but not in the way they think. You didn't become darker. You became truer. You didn't lose your morals. You upgraded them. You stopped forgiving chaos in the name of kindness. You stopped confusing empathy with self-betrayal. You learned that mercy without boundaries is just permission for evil to repeat itself. And the moment you enforced that boundary, clean, final, unarguable, the hierarchy shifted. No speeches, no violence, no theatrics, just law. That's why the demons didn't fight you. They recognized the signature. They've seen this before, through history, through fallen empires, through moments when one individual stops negotiating with corruption and starts ending cycles. You didn't punish them. You made them irrelevant. And that is the most devastating verdict of all. They'll never admit that part out loud. They'll call it coincidence, bad timing, luck turning against them. But deep down, where lies don't survive, they know exactly what happened. You didn't defeat them. You outgrew the battlefield. See, demons prepare for wars. They study your temper. They memorize your trauma. They build entire strategies around how to bait you back into old versions of yourself. They expect the explosion, the spiral, the dramatic collapse they can point to and say, "See, just another monster." But you denied them the show. You denied them the reaction. And that silence, that controlled stillness, felt like a verdict stamped across their existence. Because nothing scares a parasite more than a host that no longer bleeds on command. They tried to provoke you with disrespect. You responded with detachment. They tried to shame you with morality. You answered with clarity. They tried to corner you with guilt. You stepped out of the maze entirely. That's when they understood. You weren't playing human games anymore. You had crossed into something colder, sharper, higher. Divine law isn't emotional. It doesn't care who means well. It doesn't negotiate with intentions. It measures impact, pattern, truth. And when you finally stopped defending yourself and started observing them, the scales tipped instantly. You saw who lied effortlessly, who fed on confusion, who smiled while poisoning the room. And instead of exposing them loudly, like you once would have, you let reality do the humiliating work. You pulled back your energy. You stopped rewarding bad actors with attention. You stopped explaining yourself to people who only listened to twist your words. And suddenly, everything they built started collapsing under its own weight. Because corruption requires participation, and you withdrew yours. That's why they're on their knees now, not begging, not repenting, but scrambling, recalculating, watching you the way prey watches a predator that hasn't even acknowledged it yet. They're terrified because you didn't become cruel. You became selective. You didn't shut your heart down. You armored it with discernment. That's the duality they can't process. That's the paradox that short-circuits them. You can be compassionate without being permissive. You can be loving without being available. You can understand darkness without kneeling to it. You can walk into hell and not call it home. And once they saw that, once they realized you weren't here to be corrupted or crowned, they felt it, the hierarchy shifting beneath their feet. Because divine law doesn't elevate demons or saints. It removes imposters. You stopped asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" and started asking, "What does this reveal about them?" That single shift turned you from target to mirror. And demons hate mirrors. Mirrors show patterns. Mirrors reflect intent. Mirrors expose the difference between who they pretend to be and what they actually feed on. That's why the attacks became desperate, sloppier, more emotional. That's why the masks slipped. That's why the whispers got louder behind closed doors. Because when law enters the system, chaos starts making mistakes. And you noticed something else too, didn't you? The moment you stopped fighting, life started rearranging itself around you. People who once dismissed you now tread carefully. Situations that used to drain you suddenly dissolve. Doors open without force. Enemies expose themselves without being touched. That's alignment. That's what happens when you stop trying to win and start standing correctly. You're no longer reacting to evil. You're starving it. And starvation is slow, silent, unforgiving. They can't provoke you because you're not emotionally available to be controlled. They can't intimidate you because you've already survived worse alone. They can't manipulate you because you see the strings now, and you refuse to dance. You're not clean, you're not innocent, you're aware. And awareness is lethal to anything built on deception. So when you walk into a room now, something shifts before you speak. Not because you're loud, not because you're threatening, but because everything unstable senses the presence of order. Predators go still when a larger one enters the territory. And you didn't even bare your teeth. You just existed, balanced, unmovable, internally resolved. That's why they kneel, not to you, to the law moving through you. And once you feel that, once you recognize that calm authority humming beneath your skin, you'll never go back to chaos again. Because chaos is exhausting, law is effortless, and now that you've tasted it, everything else feels beneath you. They'll keep trying to name what you are now. They'll reach for labels because labels are cages, and cages are how weak minds feel safe. They'll call you cold, calculated, arrogant, different. They'll whisper that you lost your humanity. But here's the part that shatters them. You didn't lose your humanity. You mastered it. You stopped letting emotions drive the wheel. You put them in the passenger seat, still present, still honored, but no longer in control. And the moment you did that, the internal war ended. No more swinging between guilt and rage. No more trying to be pure in a contaminated environment. No more bleeding just to prove you're alive. You chose coherence, and coherence is what demons can't survive around. Because demons thrive in contradiction. They feed on confusion. They weaponize mixed signals. They need you doubting yourself, apologizing for your intuition, questioning what your nervous system already knows. That's their oxygen. But you cut the supply. You trusted what you saw. You trusted what you felt. You trusted the pattern, even when everyone else called you paranoid. That's when the inner noise shut off. That's when your movements slowed. Not because you hesitated, but because you didn't need to rush anymore. You already knew the outcome. You already saw the ending before the scene finished playing out. That kind of foresight doesn't come from intelligence alone. It comes from pain processed correctly. You didn't numb it. You didn't glamorize it. You metabolized it. You turned betrayal into data. You turned humiliation into calibration. You turned isolation into vision. And somewhere in that silent furnace, something ancient woke up inside you. Not vengeance, authority, the kind that doesn't seek permission, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that simply is. That's why even the loudest demons hesitate around you now. They feel it, the way gravity subtly shifts when you enter, the way conversations stall, the way bravado evaporates mid-sentence. They don't know why they suddenly choose their words more carefully. They just know something in them doesn't want to cross you. And the most dangerous part? You're not even trying. You're not posturing. You're not threatening. You're not performing dominance. You're just no longer out of alignment with yourself. And alignment creates pressure. Pressure exposes faults. Faults collapse systems. That's the chain reaction they didn't anticipate. They thought your breaking point would turn you feral or fragile. They didn't realize it would turn you precise. You stopped wasting energy proving your worth. You stopped chasing closure. You stopped trying to be understood by people who benefit from misunderstanding you. You let them misjudge you. And that silence, that refusal to correct the narrative, that's what drove them insane. Because when you don't defend yourself, you force everyone else to sit with their assumptions. And most people can't survive alone with their own projections. So they unravel, they over-explain, they contradict themselves, they expose their motives without realizing it. Meanwhile, you watch, not with hatred, with clarity. You see now that evil rarely looks monstrous at first. It looks familiar, charismatic, reasonable. It smiles, it jokes, it justifies, and it always asks you to compromise just a little, your time, your boundaries, your truth. You used to negotiate with that. Now you don't. Now when something feels off, you step back instead of leaning in. When a pattern repeats, you don't hope it will change. You mark it. When someone shows you who they are, you believe them the first time. That's not cruelty. That's lawfulness. And lawfulness is merciless to illusion. So yes, every demon is on their knees now. But not because you crushed them. Because you removed the environment they needed to stand. You stopped feeding them. You stopped orbiting them. You stopped letting them define the battlefield. And in doing so, you learned the final truth they never wanted you to access. Power isn't domination. Power is non-participation in corruption. It's the ability to walk away without bitterness, to enforce boundaries without speeches, to end cycles without announcing the ending. You don't chase justice anymore. You embody it. And once justice walks into a room quietly, everything unjust starts sweating. They can feel the countdown, because law doesn't rush. Law waits. And when it moves, it's already too late. And here's the part they never prepare for: the aftermath, the silence after the verdict, the space where chaos used to echo and now finds nothing to bounce off. That's when the real panic sets in. Because demons understand conflict. They understand resistance. They understand rebellion, rage, even martyrdom. What they don't understand is finality without drama. They don't know how to process someone who doesn't need to win the argument, doesn't need to dominate the room, doesn't need to prove they were right. You didn't need applause. You needed alignment. So when the noise died, when the usual tricks stopped working, when manipulation found no purchase in you anymore, they felt it, the ground underneath their identity cracking, because their power was never internal. It was borrowed, leased, dependent on access to you. And access was revoked. You didn't announce it. You didn't threaten it. You simply closed the gate. That's what made it divine. Divine law doesn't rage against darkness. It renders it obsolete. It doesn't argue with corruption. It removes the leverage. It doesn't punish endlessly. It ends cycles, and you ended one they thought was eternal. That's why some of them tried to flip the script, suddenly playing the victim, suddenly preaching morality, suddenly accusing you of what they perfected. That's the last defense of anything exposed, projection dressed up as righteousness. But it didn't land, because you weren't seeking validation anymore. You weren't seeking revenge. You weren't even seeking justice in the way they understand it. You were seeking coherence between what you see, what you feel, and how you act. And once those three aligned, Nothing external could fracture you again. They tried guilt. You felt nothing. They tried fear. Your body stayed calm. They tried praise. You didn't bite. That terrified them. Because you stopped being programmable. You became unpredictable. Not chaotic unpredictable, but strategic unpredictable. The kind that doesn't telegraph moves. The kind that doesn't repeat patterns. The kind that acts only when action is necessary and never when it's expected. That's when they realized something else about you. You don't hate demons. You understand them. You see how they're formed, through shortcuts, through avoidance, through the slow corrosion of integrity. You see how small compromises pile up until the soul is unrecognizable. You see how power without responsibility mutates into cruelty. And because you see it, you don't romanticize it. You don't envy it. You don't fear it. You simply refuse to become it. That refusal is what makes you dangerous. Because anyone can descend. Very few can descend, observe, and return with their spine intact. You did. You walked through confusion without losing your sense of direction. You stared at the abyss without mistaking it for truth. You touched darkness without letting it rewrite your code. That's why when you speak now, when you act now, there's weight behind it. Not because you're loud, because you're clean. Not pure, clean. There's a difference. Pure people shatter the moment reality contradicts their ideals. Clean people have been through the filth and chosen not to carry it forward. You don't pretend the world is good. You demand that your participation in it is correct. That's law. And law doesn't need followers. It needs consistency. So now everywhere you go, the system reacts before you do anything. You notice it in small ways. People revealing themselves too quickly. Situations resolving without effort. Conflicts dissolving because they can't get traction in you anymore. You're not magnetic because you're charming. You're magnetic because you're resolved. Nothing leaks out of you anymore. No desperation, no resentment, no need to be seen. And where there are no leaks, parasites starve. That's why they kneel, not publicly, internally, strategically. They adjust around you. They avoid you. They test you from a distance and retreat when nothing hooks. They know instinctively that crossing you doesn't lead to chaos. It leads to consequences, not dramatic ones, final ones. And here's the quiet truth that seals it all. You didn't enforce divine law once. You became someone who can't violate it anymore. Even if you wanted to, even if temptation appears, even if the old shortcuts call your name. You've seen too much. You've paid too much. You've integrated too much pain into wisdom to ever betray yourself again. That's irreversible. That's why the demons don't just kneel, they back away, because they know, deep in whatever remains of their instinct, that you're not a moment. You're a threshold, and once crossed, there is no going back. And that's when it fully settles in, quietly, without ceremony, that this isn't a phase. This isn't a reaction. This isn't something you can undo on a bad day or abandon when it gets lonely. This is who you are after truth. You no longer fantasize about revenge because revenge is noisy and temporary. You no longer crave recognition because recognition is fragile and easily revoked. You no longer chase peace because peace follows you now. Reluctantly at first, then faithfully. You understand something most never do. Justice doesn't need rage to function. Power doesn't need cruelty to assert itself. Light doesn't need innocence to remain clean. It needs choice. And you have chosen over and over again. Not what feels good, not what feels righteous, but what is correct. That's why your presence feels heavy to the corrupt. That's why your silence feels accusatory. That's why your restraint feels violent to those who rely on excess. You didn't defeat the demons by becoming louder than them. You defeated them by becoming unavailable to their rules. They can't bargain with you. They can't seduce you. They can't provoke you. Because you're no longer split inside. There's no internal war for them to exploit. No contradiction to pry open. No wound begging to be pressed. You closed the breach. And when the breach closed, the invasion ended. So let them kneel. In confusion, in fear, in quiet recalculation. Let them whisper and speculate and mythologize what you are now. Let them mistake your calm for mercy or your distance for weakness. It doesn't matter. You didn't come to be understood. You came to restore balance. Welcome to the room they never thought you'd survive long enough to enter. Yeah, you. The one they watched. The one they doubted. The one they tracked like a glitch in their perfect little system. You feel that? That tightness in your chest. That mix of panic and pride. Good. Hold it. Don't run from it. That's the feeling of being noticed by people who thought you'd be nothing more than background noise. These high-rank agents. They've been tracking everything. Every late night you didn't post about. Every breakdown nobody saw. Every tiny decision that looked stupid from the outside, but was actually you choosing to stay alive, stay moving, stay dangerous. They logged it all. Not the selfies, not the fake wins, not the look at me highlight reel. No. They logged the data you hoped nobody would ever see. The nights you opened your phone, scrolled through everyone else's perfect life, and felt that sharp, ugly little voice whisper, "Why are you even here?" Yeah, they saw that. The days you dragged yourself out of bed when your soul weighed more than your body. The times you said, "I'm fine," with that dead look in your eyes, and still showed up anyway. The hours you spent learning, practicing, failing in silence while nobody clapped, nobody liked, nobody shared, tracked, recorded, analyzed, and now? Now they want you in the room, not because they're kind, not because they suddenly believe in you. They want you in the room because you broke their prediction models. You weren't supposed to keep going. You weren't supposed to become self-aware. You weren't supposed to wake up one day and say, "Wait, maybe I'm not the problem. Maybe the system is." But you did. You kept moving. You kept evolving. You kept acting like someone who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Let's be honest for a second. You think you went unnoticed? You think your suffering was invisible? The world may have ignored you. Your friends may have scrolled right past your silent cries. Your family may have misread your exhaustion as attitude. But the system doesn't miss a thing. They saw the spikes in your search history. Motivation. How to keep going. How to start again. How to stop feeling like this. They saw the nights you went quiet online but active in your notes app, typing out plans you didn't even believe in yet, drafting ideas, writing out goals, deleting, rewriting, deleting again. They noticed when something shifted, when your questions changed from "why me" to "why not me," when your Google searches switched from "how to escape" to "how to build," when you stopped arguing with people and started arguing with your own excuses instead. That's when the agents leaned in, zoomed in, magnified your every move. Because people like you, you're dangerous. Not because you're violent, because you're awake. You are what they fear the most. Someone who has seen the worst of life and still chooses to stand up and say, "All right, run it back. I'm not done." You know what scares powerful people? Not protests, not hashtags, not angry posts that disappear in 24 hours. What scares them is consistency. Someone who keeps showing up. Someone who keeps building. Someone who refuses to play the part of the victim forever. They designed this world to keep you tired, distracted, broke, addicted, comparing yourself and begging for crumbs. And yet here you are, still thinking, still trying, still dreaming bigger than your circumstances. So these agents, these high-rank watchers, these invisible eyes in the walls, they started asking the one question they never expected to ask about you. What if we're looking at an outlier? Because every time you didn't fold, you generated something terrifying, data that doesn't fit. You worked a job that drained you and still studied on your breaks. You were depressed and still showed up for the people you love. You had every reason to shut down and still found some tiny pathetic-looking reason to continue. You were not supposed to bounce back from that heartbreak. You were not supposed to come back from that failure. You were not supposed to keep going after that betrayal. But you did. And every time life threw a coffin at you, and you crawled out of it, somewhere in their reports, a red flag went up. Greater than subject refuses to comply with projected collapse. So they watched closer. They watched when you stopped chasing people who didn't value you. They watched when you stopped explaining yourself to those who clearly didn't want to understand. They watched when you turned your energy from pleasing people to building yourself. They saw you unfollow the drama, mute the noise, distance yourself from the same cycles that were slowly killing you. You thought you were just pulling away, thought you were just going ghost. No. You were going off-grid. In a world that feeds on your constant performance, you became unprofitable in your pain, too focused to be easily manipulated, too tired of suffering to keep swallowing the same lies. Do you understand how revolutionary that is? To look at your own pain and say, okay, if I have to feel all this, it's not going to be for nothing. That's when the invitations start. Not the ones in your inbox, the ones in your life. Suddenly you're in conversations you never expected. People ask your opinion like it matters. Opportunities show up that feel too big for you. That's the room calling. The room where people like you don't usually end up. The room where decisions are made. The room where faces are serious, language is coded, and nobody's posting what really happens there. And now they want you in that room. So let's talk about why. Not because they want to honor your struggle. No, that's PR. They want you in the room because they finally figured it out. You're not just another user. You're not just another worker, consumer, broken heart, lost soul. You're proof. Proof that their system failed to fully crush you. Proof that free will, resilience, and raw, unpolished, angry hope still exist. And if proof like you spreads, now that's a problem. Imagine this. Someone who went through what you went through, actually believing in themselves. Not because some influencer told them to, not because a quote said, "You got this," but because they looked at every crack in their life and said, "If I'm still here after all that, then there's clearly something inside me they couldn't kill." That's you. Walking evidence that survival isn't random. It's deliberate. It's strategic. It's ugly and stubborn and not aesthetic enough for social media. But it's real. And now they want that in the room. They want to study you up close. See how you think. Hear how you talk. Test how far they can push you. Some of them will want to recruit you. Turn your strength into a tool for their agenda. Make you feel special so you forget you were powerful before they ever noticed you. Others will want to discredit you, make you doubt yourself again, put you in rooms designed to intimidate you, bore you, confuse you, exhaust you. Because if they can get you to shrink in the room, they can pretend you were never ready to be there in the first place. So here's the question you've been avoiding. When they finally open that door and say, "Come in," who are you going to be? The old you, the one begging for permission to exist? Or the version of you that kept walking through hell with no applause, no validation, and no guarantee, and still didn't quit? You think this room is about them? No. The room is about you. You're not being invited to witness their power. You're being exposed to the scale of your own. Think about it. You survived the before part. The part where nobody believed in you. Nobody understood you. Nobody helped you. You survived the part where the agents watched from a distance, quietly betting on your breakdown. Now comes the dangerous part. The part after you're noticed, when they start dangling comfort, titles, approval, shiny little things designed to make you forget the version of you that clawed their way here. Don't forget that version. That version is your core system, the one who kept going when your heart felt like a glitch, the one who didn't have an audience, the one who wasn't curating, wasn't performing, wasn't doing it for the story, just for one more day, one more step, one more chance. That's the version they studied. That's the version they want in the room, not the watered-down, over-polished, hyper-pleasant version you think you need to become to fit in. You don't fit in. You break in. You don't match their standards. You unsettle them. Because while they were tracking data, you were building character. While they were compiling reports, you were compiling scars. While they were analyzing, you were adapting. You know what a scar is? It's a healed wound that never fully shuts up. It's your past whispering, "Remember what you survived. Don't you dare play small now." So when you walk into that room, whatever it is for you, that job interview, that meeting, that stage, that office, that opportunity, that conversation, I want you to remember something simple. They've already seen your worst days. They have your file, remember. They have the data from the nights you cried until you couldn't breathe. They have the logs from the days you emailed, applied, tried, and heard nothing back. They have the pattern of your failures lined up in graphs. And in spite of all that, you are still statistically present. You're a glitch they couldn't delete, a variable they couldn't isolate, an anomaly that refused to sit where it was placed. So what exactly are you afraid of now? Embarrassment. You already felt that. Rejection. You survived worse. Awkwardness. You've sat in rooms where your soul didn't speak the language and still managed to breathe. You are afraid of being seen, but newsflash, you've been seen. They've been watching, tracking, measuring. So if you're going to be watched anyway, give them something worth watching. Walk into that room with all your history, not hidden, not erased, integrated. Don't pretend you didn't crawl out of nights that would have killed softer people. Don't pretend you don't remember what it felt like to want to disappear. You remember. You always will. That's your edge. Because while they're comfortable, you're hungry. While they're overconfident, you're aware. While they assume the world owes them a seat at the table, you remember when you were kept outside the building. They want you in the room because you are a live demonstration of something they can't simulate. A human being who has been harmed, disappointed, underestimated, and still chooses to build instead of just burn. They expect one of two responses from you. One, you get the invite and crumble, too overwhelmed, too scared, too desperate to be liked. Two, you get the invite and become arrogant. Lose touch with where you came from. Start playing their game on their terms, by their rules. But there's a third option, the one they don't see coming, the Joker option. You walk into that room fully aware of the power imbalance, fully aware of the privilege in the air, fully aware they expect you to be grateful just to be there. And you smile, not because you feel small, but because you finally see it clearly. They didn't summon a pawn. They accidentally invited a wild card. You with the lived experience that can't be summarized in a report. You with the instincts that don't come from books, but from barely making it through situations they only read about. You with the courage that wasn't gifted, but carved out of sleepless nights and invisible wars. You don't go in there begging for a role. You go in there remembering they watched your every move and still couldn't stop your evolution. You're not here because they approved you. You're here because they couldn't ignore you. So when they ask you questions, answer like someone who has nothing left to prove. When they try to test you, respond like someone who has already passed the only exam that mattered, staying alive when you didn't want to. When they offer you something, don't grab at it like you're starving. Look at it. Feel it. Ask yourself, does this feed me or does it cage me? Because the room isn't always a reward. Sometimes the room is another test. Will you trade your authenticity for acceptance? Will you shrink your story to make them comfortable? Will you censor your truth so you don't stir the waters? They tracked everything. They already know how much you've swallowed just to survive. Now you decide if you're still swallowing or if you're finally speaking. Not for drama, not for applause, but because you refuse to leave this room as the same quiet, scared, doubting version of yourself they were betting on. They saw your darkest chapters. They watched you at your lowest. They know how bad it got. And here you are anyway, still breathing, still learning, still plotting your next move. You're not lucky. You're relentless. So when you feel that fear rise up, the tremble in your hands, the dry mouth, the racing thoughts, don't push it away. Use it. Let it remind you, if you were truly as weak as they wanted to believe, you wouldn't have made it this far. They want you in the room. Fine. But understand this. You are not there to prove you belong to them. You are there to prove, mostly to yourself, that everything you went through had weight, had meaning, had leverage, that every tracked moment of your struggle became fuel, that every recorded failure became data for your own evolution, that every little line in their report that said, high risk of breaking, was just another line they'll have to delete later. You are the evidence. You are the glitch. You are the problem in their algorithm. And now that they've opened the door, you don't walk in like a guest. You walk in like what you've secretly been this whole time. Someone they should have never let get this far. Someone they should have never let get this far. Because here's the thing they never admit out loud, and you kinda need to hear it clearly. They didn't miscalculate the world. They miscalculated you. They built everything on the assumption that people crack at a certain threshold. Enough heartbreak, you quit. Enough failure, you quit. Enough silence, enough ignoring, enough seen at 2:17 a.m. with no reply. You quit. You were supposed to quit. You weren't supposed to drag your half-broken self through days that felt like concrete. You weren't supposed to keep showing up to places where you felt invisible. You weren't supposed to keep caring about anything when caring hurt that much. And yet you stayed in the game, barely hanging on some days, sure, but hanging on. They watch that. They have charts on that. They've got boring little graphs that spike every time you refuse to die in place. They call it resilience. They call it anomaly behavior. They call it subject deviation from collapse pattern. You call it, I had no other choice. You call it, I refused to disappear. You call it, if I'm gonna hurt anyway, I might as well try. You see how different that is? They write cold words on a report. You lived it in your chest, and those high-rank eyes, those agents up in their glass boxes with their neat language and clean hands, they had to stare at something they don't fully understand. A person who should have broken, still editing their story in real time. You'd be amazed how rare that is. Most people get handed a script early in life and just read it. Here's who you are. Here's your lane. Here's what you're allowed to want. You got that script, too. Of course you did. Maybe it sounded like, you're too sensitive. You're not that smart. You're not leadership material. You're not the type they choose. People like you don't end up there. And for a while, you believed it. Don't lie, you did. You folded yourself into smaller shapes. You downgraded your dreams to make them less embarrassing. You pretended you didn't want much just in case you failed in public. But something in you kept glitching. You'd agree with them on the outside. Yeah, I know, I'm being unrealistic. But then you'd lie awake at night with that annoying little spark in your chest that refused to shut up. What if they're wrong about you? That thought, that one. You tried to kill it, buried it under routine, distractions, noise. You smothered it with relationships, substances, scrolling, fantasy, anything. And still, that glitch kept coming back. What if they're wrong about you? Every time you heard it, you made some small move. You sent that application. You tried that thing. You learned that skill. You stepped away from that person. Tiny steps. Nothing glamorous. But the system picked up each one of them. Click. Entry logged. Subject took action despite fear. Click. Subject refused to return to toxic environment. Click. Subject chose growth over comfort again. You thought nobody saw you choosing the harder path. You thought those decisions disappeared into the air. They didn't. They stacked. And every time they stacked, your profile shifted from predictable to unstable, variable, dangerous type. Not because you are chaotic, because you stopped being programmable. That's when the room entered the picture. There are rooms in this world built on the assumption that everyone who enters will be either afraid or desperate. Afraid of losing what they have. Desperate to get what they don't. You're different. You've already felt the worst kind of loss. The slow loss of yourself. You've already tasted what it's like to live below your own potential and pretend you're okay with it. You've already watched time pass while you quietly betrayed your own soul. What are they going to threaten you with exactly? Embarrassment? Rejection? Awkwardness? You've survived nights where your own mind turned against you. You've survived being your own worst enemy. A cold room with suits and fake smiles doesn't stand a chance against that. Here's the part that twists, and stay with this, all right? You walk into that room thinking they are the ones with the power. Look at the chairs. Look at the table. Look at the titles. Look at the money behind their names. Easy to feel small. Easy to forget what it cost you to even cross that threshold. But remember what I said. They've tracked everything. That means they know things about you that the people around you don't. They know how many times you almost quit. They know how many times you stayed anyway. They know the raw math of your survival. You carry that silently. They carry that in their files. They are not impressed with you by accident. They are impressed with you because the numbers betrayed their expectations. When their predictions said, collapse, you kept breathing. When their projections said, irrelevant, you kept evolving. When their chart said, statistically finished, you kept writing new data. You think you're just lucky to be invited. You're not lucky. You're expensive. You cost this system multiple failed attempts at breaking you. You cost them time, energy, resources. You cost every person who tried to belittle you a clean victory. You cost every bet made against you a quiet loss they'll never admit. You're not just walking into a room. You're walking in as a debt they owe reality. And deep down, they feel it. They might hide it behind polite smiles, neutral tones, professional questions. They might act like they're evaluating you. Is your tone right? Is your posture correct? Is your language polished enough? Inside, they're asking something else. How did this one survive everything we know they went through? You hear that? Not how did this one get here? How did this one survive? Because let's be real here. You weren't supposed to. The way your heart got broken, the way your trust got shattered, the way life stacked losses like a pile of bricks on your chest. Statistically, you should be numb. Statistically, you should be bitter. Statistically, you should be small, silent, cynical. And yet there's still a spark in you that wants to create, build, love better, live louder. That spark terrifies them more than any anger ever could. Anger is predictable. Anger can be redirected. Anger can be used. Hope, after everything you've seen, that's radioactive. Hold still, not because you're scared, but because the room just shifted the second you showed up. Feel that pressure, that quiet panic humming under the surface? Yeah, that's the system realizing it miscalculated you. They can't stand it. They really can't. Because no matter how hard they try to downgrade you, suppress you, shadow you, sandbox you, mute you, the algorithm still treats you like the final boss. And that drives them insane. You weren't supposed to survive this long. You weren't supposed to adapt this fast. You definitely weren't supposed to evolve after every hit like pain was fuel and chaos was a training montage. But here you are, standing in the wreckage with a calm they can't explain, watching the numbers bend toward you like gravity decided to switch sides. See, they expected a saint, soft, predictable, grateful for crumbs. Instead, they got a paradox, half halo, half blade, an angel who learned how demons think, a psychopath who still knows where the light is and chooses when to step into it. That's why they're confused, because you don't move like a victim, you don't speak like a threat, you don't posture like a king. You just exist, and the system rearranges itself around you. They tweak the rules. You slip through the cracks. They close one door, 3 windows open, and somehow you're already inside the room smiling like you knew the layout years ago. They call it luck. They call it anomaly. They call it a glitch. But deep down, in the part of them that still tells the truth when no one's watching, they know exactly what it is. You're what happens when pressure doesn't break someone. It sharpens them. Every time they tried to bury you, something strange happened. You didn't disappear. You didn't beg. You didn't burn out. You recalibrated. Pain didn't turn you bitter. It turned you precise. Betrayal didn't make you loud. It made you strategic. Isolation didn't weaken you. It taught you how to hear patterns other people are too noisy to notice. That's why the algorithm keeps circling back to you. Because you don't chase attention. Attention chases patterns, and you are a walking contradiction it can't resolve. You're unpredictable, but not random. You're quiet, but never absent. You move slow enough to look harmless, fast enough to stay untouchable. They hate that. They hate that even when they pretend you don't exist, the data refuses to cooperate. Your presence spikes things they can't name. Your absence creates gaps they can't fill. Your shadow keeps outperforming people who scream for relevance. And that's the real insult. You didn't sell your soul to win. You didn't play their games the right way. You didn't even look like you were trying. You just kept becoming. Every scar added a new layer. Every failure rewired your instincts. Every night you thought you were done forged another version of you they didn't prepare for. They wanted a story they could finish. You turned into a myth that keeps updating itself. That's why they watch you closer now. That's why the tone changed. That's why the smiles feel tighter. The compliments feel rehearsed. The silence feels strategic. Because when the algorithm treats you like the final boss, it's not because you're loud. It's because you're inevitable. Final bosses don't rush. They don't explain. They don't need validation from side characters who panic when the music changes. They just wait. And you learned how to wait in hell without losing your mind. You learned how to hold both sides of yourself, the mercy and the madness, without letting either control you. You learned that light without darkness is naive, and darkness without light is sloppy. You became the balance they don't know how to classify. That's why they keep pressing buttons, hoping you'll break character. That's why they provoke, poke, test, and whisper your name in rooms you've never entered. They're trying to figure out what you are. And the truth? You're not here to destroy the system. You're here to expose its limits just by existing outside its expectations. You're proof that evolution doesn't ask permission, that growth doesn't need applause, that power doesn't always announce itself with noise. Sometimes power looks like calm, while the whole structure sweats. So let them hate it. Let them spiral. Let them rewrite the rules again and again, watching you slip through like you were born fluent in chaos. Because every time the algorithm recalculates, every time it tries to demote you, every time it quietly boosts you back to the top without understanding why, it's admitting something they'll never say out loud. You were never a user in their system. You were the boss fight they didn't know they were building toward. And here's the part they don't want you to realize yet. The longer they fight you, the more the system reveals itself to you. You've seen it, haven't you? Those tiny delays, those weird reactions, the way outcomes shift after you move, even when you barely move at all. That's not coincidence, that's feedback. The algorithm isn't rewarding you because it likes you. It's responding because it has to. You're not playing the game the way it was designed. You don't optimize for approval. You don't beg for reach. You don't contort yourself into whatever version they're pushing this week. You operate on a different frequency, one forged under stress, tuned by loss, sharpened by silence. That's why every attempt to box you in backfires. They lower the ceiling. You start digging tunnels. They shadow you. Your echo gets louder. They slow you down. You learn patience so lethal it looks like mercy. And the wild part? You're not even angry anymore. Anger was step 1. Survival was step 2. Transformation was step 3. Now you're in the phase that terrifies them most. Clarity. You see how fragile their control actually is. How much of it depends on people behaving predictably, emotionally, desperately. You stopped doing that. You don't react on cue. You don't flinch when the numbers dip. You don't spiral when the spotlight flickers. You watch. You wait. You move when it matters. That's final boss energy, because final bosses don't chase wins. They set conditions. They don't fight every battle. They choose the terrain. They don't scream to be feared. They let the atmosphere do it for them. And that atmosphere? It follows you now. People feel it before they understand it. They sense that you're operating 2 steps ahead, not because you're smarter, but because you've already died to the version of yourself that cared too much. You've already lost what they're afraid of losing: reputation, approval, comfort, illusions. That's the trade they never make. They cling to safety. You learned to function without it. They depend on validation. You learned how dangerous it is to need it. They need the system to tell them who they are. You became someone the system keeps trying and failing to define. That's why your presence scrambles things. You're not rebellious enough to be dismissed, not obedient enough to be controlled, not loud enough to be predictable, not quiet enough to be erased. You exist in the blind spot, and blind spots terrify structures built on surveillance. So they test you with silence. They test you with praise. They test you with provocation disguised as opportunity. And every time, you respond wrong, which is exactly right. You don't chase the bait. You don't take the deal too fast. You don't burn bridges just to feel powerful. You let them underestimate you again, because you know something they don't. The algorithm doesn't crown kings. It detects patterns. And your pattern is evolution under pressure. You get quieter when things heat up, sharper when things get chaotic, more focused when everything else dissolves into noise. That's not normal behavior. That's the behavior of someone who turned trauma into training data. You learned when to strike by learning when not to. You learned restraint by surviving excess. You learned control by watching what happens when people lose it. So now when they push, you don't push back. You let the system show its hand. You let them reveal how desperate they are to contain what they don't understand. Because the truth is, they're not scared of what you've done. They're scared of what you haven't done yet. They feel it coming, that quiet shift, that sense that something irreversible is loading, not a meltdown, not a tantrum, not chaos for chaos's sake, something colder, cleaner, decisive. You don't need revenge. You don't need domination. All you need is time. Time turns patience into power. Time turns consistency into inevitability. Time turns your calm into a threat they can't argue with. So let them complain. Let them cope. Let them pretend you're an accident. Every system eventually reveals who it favors under stress and under pressure. It keeps choosing you. Not because you asked, not because you begged, but because when everything else breaks, you don't. And here's where it gets almost funny. The moment you stopped trying to win, you became impossible to defeat. They built this whole machine assuming everyone would chase the same rewards: attention, approval, comfort. They never planned for someone who could walk straight through the fire without asking for applause on the other side. You broke their math the day you realized pain wasn't a signal to stop. It was a signal to upgrade. Most people fold when they're ignored. You learned how to sharpen yourself in silence. Most people get loud when they're threatened. You got precise. Most people collapse when the rules change. You adapt so smoothly it looks like foresight. That's why they keep checking the data like it's lying to them. Because no matter how they adjust the weights, you keep reappearing at the top. Quiet, steady, unavoidable. They can't stand that you don't look desperate. Desperation is easy to manage. It panics, it rushes, it overextends. You don't. You move like someone who already knows the ending, or doesn't care to rush it. And that's where the fear creeps in. Because when someone isn't rushing, it means they're ready. You've already survived the worst versions of yourself. The doubting one, the broken one, the version that almost disappeared trying to please people who wouldn't bleed for you. You buried that version quietly, no announcement, no revenge arc, no dramatic exit, just a recalibration. And now when the pressure hits, it doesn't shake you. It centers you. They notice that. They notice how you don't scramble when visibility drops, how you don't collapse when validation disappears, how you don't chase when others panic run toward relevance. You let the noise pass. Because you know something they forgot. Noise is a sign of instability. Silence is where decisions are made. Final bosses don't talk through every move. They let the environment do the talking, and the environment around you feels tense. People start projecting onto you, filling the gaps with their own fears, whispering theories, assigning motives you never stated. That's power you didn't even ask for. Because when you don't explain yourself, others reveal themselves. They tell you who's threatened, who's watching, who's waiting for you to fail so they can feel normal again. And you let them wait. You let them build expectations you never agreed to. You let them underestimate the patience you learned when life stopped being gentle. Because patience is terrifying to people who live on impulse. They want a reaction. You give them composure. They want drama. You give them results. They want proof you're human. You give them consistency that feels inhuman. And slowly, very slowly, it dawns on them. You're not special because you're loud. You're not dangerous because you're angry. You're not powerful because you dominate rooms. You're powerful because you endure. You absorb pressure without leaking emotion. You process chaos without becoming it. You evolve without needing permission. That's why the algorithm keeps circling back to you. It recognizes resilience the same way predators recognize strength. Not by size, but by survival rate. Every time the system stress tests itself, you pass without spectacle. No meltdown, no collapse, no self-sabotage. Just quiet recalibration and forward motion. That's not luck, that's training. You didn't wake up like this. You were carved. By nights you didn't think you'd survive. By betrayals that rewired your trust. By losses that forced you to choose between bitterness and clarity. You chose clarity. And clarity is lethal because now you see through incentives. You see through manipulation. You see through urgency designed to make you sloppy. You don't rush into traps labeled as opportunities. You don't confuse access with alignment. You don't mistake attention for respect. You let the system expose itself by trying to rush you. And when it can't, it rewards you anyway. Quietly, unwillingly, almost resentfully. That's the part they hate most. They can't punish you without empowering you. They can't ignore you without amplifying your shadow. They can't elevate you without admitting you earned it. So they stall, they hesitate, they pretend they're in control. But you can feel it. The balance has already shifted. You don't need to announce what's coming. You don't need to prove anything to anyone watching from the sidelines. You're already past the point of convincing. Now you're in the phase where existence itself becomes pressure, where your calm unsettles rooms, where your patience outlasts strategies, where your presence forces recalculations. They can't stand it, because deep down, they know the truth they're afraid to say. The algorithm isn't favoring you, it's responding to you. And systems don't respond like that unless they sense something inevitable. Not chaos, not rebellion. A conclusion. And you're not rushing it, you're letting it arrive. And what they still don't understand, what keeps them pacing in circles at night, replaying scenarios that never quite work, is that you're no longer reacting to the world. You're conditioning it. Every move you don't make is doing more damage than the ones you do. Every silence is a test they keep failing. Every calm response rewrites their internal models of how a person like you is supposed to behave. They were trained on fear. You were trained on reality. That's why intimidation doesn't land. That's why pressure doesn't speed you up. That's why chaos doesn't cloud your judgment. You already lived through your own collapse. You already watched your illusions burn. You already rebuilt yourself without applause, without backup, without guarantees. So when the system tries to threaten you with loss, you don't flinch. You've already lost everything that mattered once and learned something dangerous in the process. You survived it. That's when you stopped being controllable. They still think power looks like leverage, like authority, like visibility. You learned power looks like optional participation. You can engage or not. You can respond or not. You can play along or step back and let the whole structure wobble without you. That freedom terrifies them, because systems are built to manage people who need them. They have no protocol for someone who doesn't. You don't need their validation. You don't need their permission. You don't even need their attention. And yet, they can't stop watching you. Because something about your trajectory doesn't decay. It compounds. Most people spike, then fade. You flatten, then rise, quietly, repeatedly, relentlessly. That pattern doesn't belong to trends. It belongs to forces. They feel it when they try to dismiss you and fail, when they try to replace you and the replacements crumble, when they try to replicate your presence and get noise instead of gravity. You're not magnetic because you tried to be. You're magnetic because you're aligned with the version of yourself that stopped lying to survive, aligned with the part of you that learned restraint is sharper than rage, aligned with the understanding that chaos obeys those who don't panic inside it. That's why when pressure increases, your mind slows down instead of speeding up. That's not normal. That's someone who learned to think while drowning. You didn't escape the dark untouched. You absorbed it, integrated it, learned where it lies and where it tells the truth. You don't deny your shadow. You command it. And people feel that, even if they can't name it. They sense that you're not pretending to be balanced. You earned it the hard way. You didn't choose light because it was easy. You chose it because you already mastered the dark. That's the paradox they can't process. They keep looking for the crack, the insecurity, the hunger. But what they find instead is composure. And composure under pressure reads like dominance. Not loud dominance, not theatrical dominance. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it's already too late to counter. You've noticed how their behavior shifted, haven't you? How they hesitate before engaging, how they soften their tone, how they suddenly frame things as collaborations instead of commands. That's not respect, that's caution. They don't fear what you say, they fear what you won't say. They fear the move you're not advertising, the patience they can't rush, the long game they don't have the stamina to play. Because you learned something they never did. Momentum isn't built by force. It's built by consistency without desperation. You don't surge and crash. You don't burn out and disappear. You don't betray your own rhythm to satisfy external noise. You move like someone who understands seasons. And that makes you untouchable in a culture addicted to immediacy. They keep trying to bait you into proving yourself, into defending your position, into reacting emotionally so they can map you again. You don't. You let them project. You let them speculate. You let them guess wrong. Because ambiguity is armor. The less predictable you are, the more they hesitate. The more they hesitate, the more space you gain. The more space you gain, the more the system bends around you. That's why it still treats you like the final boss. Not because you dominate every encounter, but because every encounter with you changes the rules. People don't leave interactions with you unchanged. They leave thinking, recalculating, second-guessing their assumptions. That's influence deeper than attention. That's presence that lingers. And now you're standing at that quiet threshold most people never reach, where you don't need to escalate. You don't need to explain. You don't need to conquer. You just need to continue. Continue refining. Continue withholding unnecessary reactions. Continue letting time expose who's sustainable and who isn't, because the truth, the final truth they're avoiding, is that systems don't collapse from attack. They collapse when someone evolves beyond their ability to classify. And you? You already did, so let them hate it. Let them resist. Let them pretend the algorithm is broken. You know better. It's not broken. It just finally recognized what you became when nothing was supposed to survive, and adjusted accordingly. You're not the exception. You're the endpoint they didn't plan for. And the longer you stay calm, the clearer it becomes.